Hello and welcome to the first session of Principles of Economics, BBA, BS, BSP, HR, BF 110. My name is Faith Makawala and I am your tutor for this particular course. So, before we proceed with the course, I just want to let you know that the mindset that you carry in taking this course is very important. If you are new to this course and are intimidated by the stories going around to it, you need to hold yourself and try to shut your ears from or your eyes from whatever you're reading or hearing. If you have had a terrible experience with this course, I'd say this is a new leaf and an opportunity for you to have another greater experience with it. I'm here. I'm going to be offering all the supports by you subscribing to my tutorials. You have access to these pre-recorded tutorials, the question bank tutorials, which are basically just videos of revisions for past paper questions and past paper answer scripts. And of course, you also get assignment assistance if you are subscribed to these tutorials from February through April without any intermittent subscription in your path. And you also get test preparations. The reason for this is because a good CA is relevant to people clearing, so we are trying to give you a whole package that makes sure you clear this course by all means. Okay, so that is that. I want you to know that distance education is 100% your effort and 20% the effort of the university. And while economics is not a simple course, it's not the hardest course, especially this version of economics that we are taking. So if you put in the work and you do not leave things to the last minute, you will not have sad stories to tell about this particular course. Okay, with that said, let us begin. So today this is our first tutorial and we're going to be looking basically at the nature of economics and primarily focusing on defining what economics is, the ways in which an economist thinks, the economic problem, opportunity cost, and finally we'll close it off with looking at the production possibility frontier. That's where we're going to conclude this particular tutorial. Okay? All right. So, the word economics comes from the word economy, which is derived from a Greek word oikonomos. That simply means one who manages the household. You don't need to know this, it's just some background information that I think is relevant when we are dealing with this particular course, okay? So this course, if I'm to summarize it simply, is a course that just looks to answer questions such as who will work, what goods and how many of the goods should be produced, what resources should be used in their production, at what price should the goods be sold, what should be who should be able to get the goods that are produced. And throughout, you will be dealing with a common concept of scarcity, which is a key element in economics and a key word that just looks at how society has less to offer than the people wish it has. Okay, like we wish society had more to give to us, but it does not have the capacity to give us more. So scarcity is a key thing that you'll be looking at in here. And because of that, you're going to be looking at how to manage resources, because managing resources for a society is important as a result of this scarcity that we've talked about. So economics is basically going to be a course where you'll be studying how society manages its scarce resources, and you'll be looking at things like how people make decisions, how the people interact with each other, the forces and the trends that affect an economy as a whole. Those are things that you're going to be looking at in this course. I'll try by all means to stick to these notes that have been organized by the institution. By the way, they're the same notes, I'm just using dark mode, so the blue is black. I'm going to try by all means to use these particular notes. However, I should note that there are certain elements in my studies in this course that I noted are also quite important for us to know. So, whenever we reach a part where we need to know those elements, be prepared for me to switch up and just incorporate some of those things so that you can be able to learn them despite them not being in the notes, because I found them really helpful and I feel like they're going to help somebody else there. Okay, but we'll be on course with the way the curriculum is arranged with the school. Don't worry, I'm not about to teach you irrelevant things. Okay, so there is really no one definition for economics, although the starting useful point is this definition that was given by Lord Lionel Robbins, which says that economics is the science which studies human behavior as a relationship between ends and scarce means which have alternative uses. That's a mouthful of a definition, but believe you me, this I think is the best type of definition you should know. No matter how many words they are, it will get you marks, okay? One thing about this course, make sure you write things that will draw you marks. Of course, in simple terms, we can look at economics as simply studying how society manages its resources, but this definition over here is relevant. So now we cannot fully understand this definition unless we look at it in details. So let's just go ahead and do that. So the first part is that economics is a science. It is a science in that it uses scientific methods to study human behavior. Some of the scientific methods economics uses include the use of observation, assumptions, and models. So, observations is simply noticing the things in an environment and then trying to get more insight about them, which is one of the methods scientists use in making scientific theories as well as conclusions about issues, and economists use that as well. uh, Economists tend to use assumptions, and assumptions are relevant because they help to simplify the complex reality of the world by making it in a simple manner in order to aid understanding of theories as well as complex uh, situations. So, for instance, if we're trying to know how many goods Zambia can produce and its capacity to produce goods, it would be a tedious task because we have to look at all the goods that Zambia is producing. But in order for us to be able to know the relevant things that we should be looking at when making this analysis, we need to eliminate certain other things, and this is how economics does that using assumptions. For instance, when learning on the production capacities of an economy, is economics will go to simplify things by using what we call a production possibility frontier, which is simply an illustration of how a society producing two goods is able to produce them using the resources that it has in its economy. Now, two goods is unrealistic because societies often produce so many things. Why would we break it down to that low a level? So, the reason for this is because when we simplify those, if we get the concept and the meaning in a simpler setting, such as that, you'll be able to now get those ideologies and apply them to realistic, complex world situations, which is another reason why this is a very interesting course and why you're going to enjoy this course with the person that is going to be teaching you if your approach with this course is learning theories and concepts and being able to apply them. Because while he may not repeat questions and he may not be so predictable, his entire manner of teaching is hinged on imparting knowledge and seeing if you're able to recognize it in real life situations and be able to apply the theories that he's imparting in you. So make sure you get a grip and be able to show that you have a very flawless journey doing that. Anyway, let's get back. So those assumptions help to derive simpler ways of viewing society so that you can get understanding and clarity on economic theories. Okay, and then there's models. The models, my, my pronunciation may be a bit, I don't know, of models like this. Some people would call it models, sounds off, but the models, yes. So the models that are used in economics are a form of science. I'll take you back to some centuries in high school. if you've completed school a gazillion years ago like me. Um, in high school, you may have had those plastic things, like plastic human beings. And when you open it up, it would have like the heart, the kidneys, the stomach. If it's the anatomy of a female human body, it would even have a baby in there sometimes. That was not a real human being, but it was something that is created to resemble a real human being so that you can have an idea of how a person is on the insides. Okay, so that is a model. Or maybe when you were taking geography, you may have had those rotating globes, like the big world, and it's this big bowl that they've painted various continents and the blue waters and whatnot. All those are models. So just like those models, in economics, we also have models where we have simplified the reality of our society into simple little illustrations that would help us to understand how the real world works. Okay. um, and then we also have the part where we know that human needs are unlimited, whereas the resources uh, to satisfy those needs are limited. And this particular concept in the definition, which was looking at scarce needs, is that, sorry, I'm going to be going back and forth a lot here. Pardon me. So here, in this part of the definition where it's saying it also studies the relationship between ends and scarce means which have an alternative uses. A central topic in economics is the issue of scarcity, and scarcity is simply an ideology that looks at how a society has less to offer than what people wish it had to offer them. Okay, it's like you have a job, and ideally, you would like to maybe have a lifestyle. Ideally, you have a lifestyle that requires at least 300,000 kwacha per month, but your reality is the income you have in your life is like maybe 8,000 kwacha. Okay, so you wish you had more, but then you don't have it. So there's something missing. The resources, they are scarce. They are scarce by a huge gap because you are a 300,000 kwacha worth of a person living on 8,000 kwacha, if you get what I mean. So that's the element of scarcity. And we are going to see that a lot in this course because scarcity is a key concept in economics, and it is used to help us analyze how we should manage our resources because they are scarce. We don't have an abundance of resources as societies. Okay, um, let us go and look at something else. So the other part of the definition, which is the last one now, is that the resources can be put to alternative uses in order to meet certain ends. So because there are not many resources to go around, we now are approached with the concept of choice. As a result of the scarce resources, we must choose where we're going to channel the scarce resources that we have in order for us to be able to meet some of our needs. So this is where the aspect of alternative uses, okay, the relationship between ends and scarce needs that have alternative uses. So this is where that element of the definition comes in. One thing that we can maybe note here is that we make these choices even at an individual level. At an individual level, if you're getting 8,000 kwacha, your rent is maybe 4,500. You have 2,000 worth of bills. to cover, it means that you'd have a 500 maybe, which should cover your transport. But that's just the basics. Maybe you'd also like to have a car. Maybe you'd also like to serve. Maybe you have all these other things that you'd want to get, such as clothes, and maybe leave some little money there for you to have a weekend out with friends or family. But since the resources are not enough to sponsor all that, in that 8,000, you are now monthly or even daily posed with the reality of having to choose where you're going to allocate some of that money. So that does not just end at an individual level. Companies are making decisions every day on where they're going to channel their resources. That's how come you hear budget cuts and people very bent on not overusing resources in the company because they're trying to make choices on what they think is relevant for the firm. Even governments have their own choices to make at their own capacity. Like in our example here, there could be a decision on whether to invest in a power station or a new hospital. Why? Because there are not enough resources to go around to build both. So the choice must be made with the funds that are there. Should we invest in a power station so that we can combat load shedding, or should we be looking at investing in a hospital so that we can provide healthcare services to people that may not have access? Okay, all right. So now that we've looked at that, let's go and look at the way in which economists think. So economics has its own language and it makes extensive use of selective words, which we are going to be encountering throughout this course. Please note that on this very aspect, this is not going to be a course that you will be answering things using common sense. The great Albert Einstein said, every science is simply nothing but the refinement of everyday thinking. And you're going to hear that economics is simply common sense complicating common sense. Okay, so when you answer this, when you approach this particular course, that ideology that you understand in your layman's English, you must reach a level where you're able to explain it using economic language, or else you're treading on very thin ice and you may drown. So you need to know the language of economics, especially the selected words that will be presented to you as we go through this course. Some of the terms have been put here, for instance, the production possibility frontier, and this is basically a diagram or a model which illustrates how a society producing two goods is uh, given its resources is able to create different combination of resource distribution and allocation in producing those two goods. Then we have demand that just looks at the number of individuals in an economy or who are able and willing to pay for a particular good or service. Supply, the number of firms in an economy that are able and willing to supply or to make available a certain service or good. Then there's elasticity, which will simply be covering the responsiveness or sensitivity of the price of a commodity to changes in any one of the factors or determinants in its environment. We will go through it in much details in, I think, unit 3. And then there's also consumer surplus, which just looks at the excess income over what a consumer is willing and able to pay for. For instance, you come to Pinnacle is hosting tutorials. You find out Pinnacle is hosting tutorials whereby if you pay for if you want 3 courses running, you only have to pay a 150 each for each course running. But maybe your budget was 750 and you find that if you pay for 3 courses, principles of economics, mathematical analysis, and business communication, you only have to pay 450. So in that 750 budget, your 300 kwacha becomes your consumer surplus because you are able and willing to pay a 750 for tuitions for each course separately, but after discovering that if you take all three courses, you only have to pay 150, you save yourself 300, you have a surplus on your part. Okay, all right. Then there's also the multiplier, which just looks at how things tend to ripple and affect each other in an economy. We don't really cover this in the syllabus from my experience, but for your own advantage, same thing with comparative advantage, just who has resources at their disposal that are able to provide and deliver a particular good or service. All right, so that is that on such terminologies. So you should be able to know these terminologies, and of course the concepts around them and the phenomenon of how they work in a particular economy or industry. Okay, so these are things that we are going to be looking at. So ways in which an economist think. We are told that economists, they tend to use economic models in order for them to form an important part of their thinking. And these economic models, as previously stated, are simply a simplification of the real world, and they often incorporate assumptions, making it easier for us to understand how the real world operates. And economists also make use of mathematics, which tends to show the link or the relationship among elements in an economy. Okay, and they'll also use tables, diagrams, or graphs when making these presentations of theirs in the manner in which they think. So over here, our dearest slide there is ending on that particular part. But remember the part where I said I'm going to be incorporating some things that I think were relevant in my studies, just so we can be able to understand certain things. I think this is the part where I'm going to do that, so that you can be able to know. So I'm going to show you an economic model. Yeah, I'm going to show you an economic model so that we can just go through it briefly and then see how economists simplify reality. So let's just do that. So over here we have this model, which is a simplification of how an economy or society organizes itself. Okay, and this model is simply called the circular flow diagram. So the circular flow diagram is just a visual model which shows how currency being money, or let's put it to say it's a visual model which shows how kwacha flows through the market among the key decision makers, with the key decision makers being households and firms. Let me get my pencil. With our key decision makers here being the households over here, as well as the firms. So over here, you find that these key decision makers, they are interacting in two markets: the markets for goods and services and the markets for factors of production. So the markets for factors of production is simply a market where the inputs, or what society uses to produce goods or services, what firms use, sorry, to produce goods or services, are sold. Those are what we refer to as that's what we refer to as the market for factors of production. And factors of production, of course, by definition, are the inputs a firm uses to produce its goods or services. And then, of course, we have, I think we can give some examples of these. There are four types of factors of production. We have land, which just refers to all natural resources, and we have capital, which looks at things like buildings and machineries. Then we also have labor, which is just human effort to produce needs and wants. And then there's also entrepreneurship, which is just the know-how and skill that is needed to provide a particular good or service. Okay, so those are the factors of production. And then, of course, our households over here on the other side are just elements of this part of society they are the ones that sell or rent the factors of production to the firms, and in turn they will get an income. From that income, if they are selling labor, they'll get a wage, which is the reason here. If they're selling labor, they'll get a wage. If they're renting out, they are going to get rental income. If they are selling a product, maybe in terms of entrepreneurship, they're going to make profit out of it. Okay, so that is with the people in their households, and whatever income they get from here is what they use to go and buy goods and services in the market for goods and services. Services can be an education at CBU, which you are paying for with the business you're running or the job that you have. It can be food you go to buy in ShopRite, which are goods which are using to pay for using what? The money that you got maybe from your business or your job. So that's this diagram is simply representing that. So you find that if you are an individual here where you are falling under the households over here, and let's say maybe your name is Ari, okay? Ari works at a particular firm and maybe has a salary of 10,000 kwacha. When Ari gets 10,000 kwacha from her company, she goes to ShopRite to buy items worth of how much? Maybe 3,000, her groceries. Okay, when she buys these groceries for 3,000 at ShopRite, ShopRite gets that as revenue, okay, which is income in their company, but it does not stay in ShopRite because ShopRite will need to pay the cashier that was servicing Ari after she got her goods and her goods from ShopRite, or they may have to pay rent to the landlord whose building they are using to operate from. So when they pay those, the employee or the employer will now get it in terms of revenue, such as a wage or rental income. Okay, and when they get that, that money goes back to the households, either to the landlord or the employee, and this demonstrates how money moves around our society. Okay, so this is the circular flow of income diagram. It is one of the key aspects of this particular course, so you can know it and just kind of get the information on what I have shared in order for you to cement your knowledge. Okay, all right, we're going to get back to the curriculum now. Oh, and before we get back to the curriculum, I also just wanted to note that firms tend to buy or hire factors of production which they use to produce their goods and services. Okay, so in the market for factors of production, the firms are buyers, and in the market for goods and services, the firms are sellers. So the two, they interchange. In factors of production, firms are buyers and they are buying factors of production in order for them to use them to produce goods and services. But in the market for goods and services, the firms are sellers and they are selling to households uh, the output of the goods and services that have been produced by the factors of production that they bought. Okay, all right, so now we're going to look at the economic problem. Remember that previously I said that a big element of this course is the concept of scarcity, which just looks at what society wishes the economy could provide but it's not able to provide. Okay, so economics basically looks at how society allocates, distributes and uses its scarce resources in order for it to meet some of its needs. Getting back, I'll emphasize again, you have 10,000 kwacha salary, your lifestyle is 300,000 kwacha. Since you cannot sponsor the 300,000 kwacha of needs, you must now decide how you're going to allocate and distribute your 10,000 kwacha in order for you to be able to meet some of those needs in that 300,000 kwacha worth of needs. So, at an individual level, at the level of a firm, at the level of society in terms of governance, we are making decisions to allocate, distribute, and utilize our scarce resources in order to meet some needs. And economics, as a result, just studies how we are doing this. So, a central element in economics is the economic problem. And the economic problem basically is the reality that society's needs are unlimited, while the resources to satisfy those needs are limited. And therefore, this course tends to look at the allocation of scarce resources among competing needs. So these resources can be human, physical, or financial, and they may be limited in supply, while the human needs and desires are infinite, never ending. And they are usually called wants. Now, in these needs or wants, some of them are necessities and some of them are luxuries, okay? So necessities include things such as basic food, clothing, and housing, okay? You need food to survive, to be alive, to keep well. You need clothing to cover up, to be warm so you don't die from the cold. You need housing so that you are protected and safe when you sleep at night, okay? However, there are also aspects that are luxuries. For instance, instead of just getting clothes, like a basic t-shirt, when you now go to a status where you need a 15,000 kwacha robe from Gucci or a 50,000 mini Kelly Hermes bag, it can be looked at as a luxurious item. But this all is dependent on the level of the individual, the resources that they have, uh, as well as humankind as a whole. Okay? And human needs, they are always unlimited, as we can see from here. So this is saying if we think about our own situation, some of the goods and services that we require, they will need for us to obtain them using these scarce resources. That is the income that is available to us. And there are likely, however, to be other items that would like to have, but we are unable to obtain them because the resources are limited. I think I have already covered this, so we can just run through this. So, the same economic problems face all individuals. The same economic problems face all individuals, households, organizations, and societies. And the economic problem is that our wants are unlimited while the resources to satisfy those wants are limited. We should know, though, that the resources that an economy has at its disposal are used to satisfy our unlimited wants as a whole. And these resources are often what are called by economists as inputs or the factors of production, of which I already briefly touched in just now. So these factors of production, they are means of producing the goods and services that a society requires to meet our human needs. And they are normally divided into three main categories. Here they are putting land, which is natural resources, labor, human resources, capital, the physical resources. But you should also add entrepreneurship, okay? There are four of them. There are not three, there are four. There's land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship. Okay. And then now, because we have all these issues of scarce resources and whatnot, there arises the question of how do we know where to put the resources? Because the reality is we have so many things to do, but we do not have enough money to actually do those things. So how do we employ our resources? And this is where, regardless of the government, the head of states, the nation, the state of an individual, there are four important economic questions that a society, an individual, or a firm asks in order for it to know how to allocate and distribute its resources in order to be able to produce the goods and services that are essential to it. And we're going to look at those now. So in this particular set of questions, you are going to find that saying the three economic questions. Updates, they are supposed to be four. This is because the first question is divided to make two. So the first question is what to produce. The second question is how much to produce. The third question is how to produce. And the fourth question is for whom to produce. So let's look at the first question, what to produce. These three questions concern the problem of how to allocate the scarce resources among alternative uses, and they help us see how we are going to allocate those resources. So a society, an individual, or a firm will ask itself what to produce. If a company has a budget of, I don't know, $10 billion, they will ask themselves, what are we going to produce? Okay? And they are going to determine the manner in which the items that they want to produce. And then after they determine the items that they want to produce, so that maybe they can say this $10 billion, we're going to use it to open up a milling plant to be selling milling meal. Okay, we get the crops, we process them, and we make milling meal. So that answers the question of what to produce. Next, they are going to have to answer how much to produce. So they need to ask themselves how many tons of milling meal are we producing? And in order for us to be able to meet the demand as suppliers for this particular product. So if they say maybe they are going to produce 50,000 tons of milling meal, then that would be the situation. From there, they're going to move on to how to produce. How to produce basically looks at, are we going to employ more labor and less technology, or more technology and less labor? What do you mean by this? Are we going to maybe get some form of machinery that will help us to peel the grain, or do we just get human beings to peel the grain from the maize stacks, kutongola amataba? Like one ideology, should we let human beings to remove the maize grains from those stalks of the maize, or do we get a machine that can do that? That's a way of figuring out how to produce. Okay, depending on capacity. So there are many ways that can be used to produce an item, and it's possible to use more labor and less capital, or more capital and less labor. For instance, to produce an item with an aim to maximize the number of people employed, you can go ahead and employ more people and use less machinery. But alternatively, if you want to produce with the aim to maximize the total expense to society, maybe you can employ machines and use them once and for all, so that you do not have so much money going out in forms of wages or salaries. So those are questions that need to be asked on how to produce. Okay, so the next question, which is the fourth question, is for whom to produce. If I come today, of which I have come today, producing these tutorials for Pinnacle Tutorials, in mind I must have whom I intend to have access to these lessons. So who am I producing for? I'd have to ask, I should produce for somebody who's interested in hearing economics broken down in the simplest way in order for them to grasp it, and also be able to learn it enough in order for them to clear it. They should be able to pay the price that I have set for the tutorials. So if they are only going to take economics from me, they should be able to afford a 250 to learn economics with me, and they should think it is necessary for them to part away with a 250 kwacha in order for them to get the knowledge and the support that they need from this tutorial. They should be confident that I know what I'm talking about, and should not be blinded by other aspects like, oh, she's just a student as well, even if she's a senior student, or why would I let another student teach me, and all that. Like, they should be aware of the value of knowledge that individuals can have and how it can be impactful for them. So those are kind of questions that I would be asking for whom to produce. And for whom to produce is who's accessing these resources and finding them helpful. So in order for me to put out a service like Pinnacle Tutorials, I knew that you would be there. to have access for it and find it useful. And here we are. Okay, so this is another way that this can be applied. So this for whom to produce just deals with once an item is produced, who should be able to obtain it? I mean, people are using scarce resources, they're using their salaries, which can be channeled to something else, uh, in order for them to have access to the item. So the service or the good should be accessible to people that can put value on it. Okay, and this is going to determine the mechanism that we're going to use to produce the items, which is a very important issue in any society, to any individual or a firm. Okay, all right. How many minutes do we have here? I think I am going to end this tutorial right here, and then we're going to continue with opportunity cost in the next tutorial, so that we can just cover the production possibility frontier and all the other issues involved with it, and then we can call this unit done. Thank you so much for tuning in. I have to cut this tutorial because I have learned that when I make these tutorials and they finish at the 40 minutes or 45 minutes mark, it's easier for me to upload them. But when they run into an hour on an hour plus, it becomes a problem. So for that reason, I'm going to cut this and then I'm going to continue the next one, because next week I want us to be looking at unit 2, and just look at the economies and then go straight into demand and supply. Okay? All right. See you in the next tutorial.